Have you ever known a murderer? Who were they? What did they do? How did you know them? So my friend brought over this hot Asian stripper to watch UFC one night. He was a bouncer at the club where she worked. He told me that she had killed her boyfriend in self-defense. Couple weeks later the chick is all over the news because it turns out that's not exactly what happened. She actually shot him in the face when he was asleep. Happened about 8 months ago. You can search it up by typing Phoenix high-rise shooting. The chick was pretty quiet the whole time she was at my house, but my god, her butt was incredible. My child's bio dad. Him and his friends shot 2 people. One died. It was gang related. He was in and out of juvie as a kid. Had a violent past. No parental guidance at all. I got out when I realized he wouldn't change. My kid doesn't know him or what he did. One day that's gonna be a hard story to tell. He has about 24 years left. He's wrote couple times. Doesn't seem to have any remorse. He's caught up in that prison life now. It's a shame. I asked my dad once if he had ever killed anyone. He was in the army for a few years and then in a bike gang and a coke dealer that would deal off a knife about 10 years before I was born. He said that wasn't a conversation one should have with their daughter. He used to sleep with a teddy bear he named Roller Polar, called us cute pet names, and would make up lyrics to rap songs. He also worked his butt off about 13-hour days to feed 3 kids as a single father because my mother never left the drug life. So yeah, IDK, what to really say. He was a bad man when he was younger but a decent father when he was old. This really touched me. People get into some crap when they're younger. I like to think having children changes a lot of people for the better. Your father sounds like a good man. Not gonna say his name, but I had a childhood friend who murdered his girlfriend by running her over in the street. He died in court from a stress-induced heart attack on the day of his trial. Growing up, I didn't really think much of him. According to my parents, he would steal stuff from me, which I got back, and he would constantly try taking me to his house. He just kinda fell off of the map, so I stopped hanging out with him. I found out through my grandparents who told me what happened to him. Coming to find out, he had a slew of problems, one being mental retardation. I don't know how he got a license. I honestly don't mean to be mean when I say that. Hadn't visited my dad's side of the family in years and decided to go stay at their remote farm in the middle of nowhere. Huge homestead dated back to the early 1900s with a guest house attached with 5 rooms. Night falls and I go to bed. Kinda creeped out and it's freezing, so I'm awake when I hear a noisy truck and see headlights against the window. I feel uneasy and lock my door. Hear voices and my uncle is chatting to the man before I hear the man come inside with his heavy boots and go into the room next to mine. Think nothing of it and go to sleep. Wake up early and head towards the dining room where I see my uncle talking to a man who is of a slender build, bushy beard and piercing blue eyes. He seems friendly enough but something felt off. My dad calls as I'm chatting to him and I excuse myself and talk to my dad, casually mention his name and his voice drops. Leave the house. I stand there stunned and ask why. His reply was many years ago he got into a fight in our country town bar and drove home drunk. Guy pulls up in front of his house about all the money he owed and in front of his family he bludgeoned him to nothing but a skin sack with a bat. Corrupt town cops called it self-defense. Years later, same bar, he lost his crap with a guy and said you will regret that. Guy disappeared and was never found. He's been known as a drug dealer and some small town strange society stuff. Never listened to my dad, but that day I left. Something was so unnerving, couldn't stay. Remember the 2 students at Virginia Tech who killed a younger girl last year? I was friends in high school with the girl who helped him hide the body. It's weird, we shared a hotel room on a school trip. I've slept next to her, worked on projects with her, Snapchatted, and then she helped someone carry out a premeditated murder. Crazy. I never would have guessed. This guy I went to middle school with killed someone over a TV, a small bag of weed, and like $4 cash. His cousin and a friend of theirs were also involved. He worked at Wendy's near my job at the time and we used to chat a bit each time we saw each other. I found out when another guy who knew him posted the news link on Facebook. It was his cousin, not his brother, and some more details. There's a family that used to live across the street from my mom's place. It was a married couple, and the wife's elderly father. One day I'm sitting on my mom's porch when the wife come running up to our house screaming, I then heard one gunshot, followed by 4 quick shots. We got the wife inside and called 911. Turns out her husband was an abusive alcoholic, and her father called him out on it. The husband was so out of it and in a blackout rage that he put a gun. That's when the woman ran to our house. The father managed to barricade himself in a room and grab another firearm. The first shot was the husband hitting the father in the chest. The other 4 were them firing off at each other. When I was a teenager, there was a young man that lived up the street from me. He was very clean cut, polite, helpful around the neighborhood. There was also a series of violent robberies in the area. In fact, the little market my mom worked at was robbed on the one night of the week my mom was off. The woman who worked that night was bludgeoned with a club. Also, a few weeks earlier, a man was murdered about 7 miles away, and the victim was decapitated. Well, it turned out that the very man who was so polite and helpful and clean cut was the killer. He was the one who killed the man, robbed the store, bludgeoned the woman, and committed the rest of the local robberies and debaucheries. When the police searched his house, they found among the many weapons a photograph of him holding the man's head. Obviously he had an accomplice. So I learned a great lesson. Smiling faces can't always be trusted, and a cold-blooded killer doesn't necessarily look like a motley bearded character. A killer can look just like the handsome guy next door. My oncologist. His name is Dr. Farid Fatah. He is currently in Jackson Prison, Michigan, serving 45 to life. He was arrested for insurance fraud. He was giving patients without cancer chemo and giving terminal patients unnecessary chemo. It was a mess. I had to go to the FBI office in Detroit to get my medical history before I could start looking for a new oncologist. A real close friend of mine, we used to sit next to each other during all middle school, is still in jail for murder. He used to deal drugs, and once, he was just 18, he repeatedly stabbed a client who refused to pay for his dose. He was a sweetheart, even my mom loved him. He used to spend a lot of time at my place, really caring, generous, and protective. I used to be more fragile during those years, and he helped me a lot to deal with bullies. Unfortunately, he grew up in the wrong neighborhood of the city, with older people making him fight against other kids since really young to be entertained and to bet on them. This always reminds me not to judge anyone, and that even the greatest people suffer from their surroundings. Never have been brave enough to visit him in jail though, and I always think about it. You should visit him. You saw his true self. One of my neighbors did a home invasion robbery, broke into an old lady's house, robbed her, violated her, strangled her. He did it when he was 18 years old, and he'll be 53 this year. He spent his entire adult life in prison. He's also a distant cousin, but I don't know the exact connection. Don't particularly want to know. Probation officer. I know a lot of them. Can't talk about them though. I can talk about my ex-boyfriend's best friend from school. They were really good mates, always hanging out together all the time. Ex said there were no flags he would end up like this. We found out that he's doing 17 years for attempted murder. Ex-2 stabbed his 5 months pregnant ex-girlfriend a bunch of times in the stomach to kill her and the child that wasn't his. They'd broken up a long time before this. It perforated her womb and bowel. Luckily they both survived. I myself don't know anyone that I know of, but someone my mum worked with back in the 70s was arrested for killing an 18-year-old boy with the back end of a crowbar. After he was arrested and awaited trial, the police found that he had cut up the kid and dumped the bits of body in a river. Yeah, the guy who owned the comic shop in my hometown, which I used to frequent, flipped his lid and murdered his girlfriend and a friend of hers before going on the lam. I believe he's now serving a life sentence. I knew someone in high school who murdered her mother for insurance. She stabbed her body and face dozens of times. Interesting story here all around. I'm on a phone and at work, but I will try to tell the story by the end of my shift. A member of my parents' congregation is a convicted murderer. When I was a kid growing up in the church, he always just seemed like a nice, normal guy. I didn't notice any ill will from anyone else in the congregation, but I did hear whispers occasionally among the other kids, and my dad confirmed that he had in fact been released from prison for murder a few years earlier. I believe he served 20 years. I had a friend in high school that killed both of his grandparents. Stabbed them both over 20 times, stole their car, and after driving for a while he pulled over and called the cops. He always seemed pretty normal when we hung out. Apparently he was schizophrenic and had stopped taking his meds. My dad works in finance. Sometimes his clients will give him little perks like tickets to a basketball game or a nice meal. One of his clients, invited us out to his family farm ranch. Has 2 kids roughly my and my brother's ages, so dad took us to R's farm. You could tell there was a ton of tension between R and his wife. He didn't hit her or yell at her in front of us, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did before and after our visit. R was kinda creepy, kinda twitchy, and had anger issues. So we spent one night, instead of 3, and went home early. A few years later, R's wife was finally trying to divorce him, so he beat her badly, then shot her 6 or so times. I wasn't exactly close with this person at all. I knew him from school from 05-10. He wasn't exactly a nice person. Grew up in a rough area, hung out with rough kids, and was known to be violent. If anyone knows what a chav is, this guy was the most stereotypical chav you could get. He was always nice to me though, especially in school. I used to smoke in school and the smokers would go to the wooded area that the school borders to do it before and after the school day. So I knew him decently well. We were civil. A few years after school in 2012, I was 18 at the time. I had learned that he and some friends kicked an elderly man to death because he complained that their music was too loud. At first it was just rumors that went around Facebook, but it made the local papers and turned out to be true. I believe he and the other culprits got sent to prison, but I also believe he was missing for a while, probably in hiding somewhere. Sickening really, but not totally surprising. Had a kid we grew up with who was a general menace. Class clown stuff mostly until around high school when his behavior began to escalate. In trouble a lot, mean to teachers, etc. He had come to some parties that my sister and I had and done some light farm work with other boys from school around my parents' property. This work stopped when my friend caught him hanging my goat up on a fence, backwards by its horns. The goat was real friendly. He began to talk to me a little more at school, seek me out in the halls, to tease me for working with his nerdy dad at a car dealership. I got the impression he picked on his dad and he wanted me to mention this behavior to his father as a humiliation tactic. I thought it was odd. Like tell that nerd Hugh, he'd use his name, that he's looking real cool today and that I said hi, nice teal shirt like he'd made fun of him that morning and wanted to remind him he couldn't get away from his insults even at work. I never said anything. Well, about 10 months after I began to work there, the dad doesn't show up for work one Saturday. I start getting calls and texts from my high school friends, sister etc. The following Monday, he was absent Saturday. We were closed Sunday, open that Monday, which is a holiday. I had no school but I had work. His parents were found murdered in a very grisly fashion, and later on his mother was found to have been brutally physically assaulted both pre and post mortem. I believe that there were also signs that the father was also, or that something was placed in an orifice post mortem. Guess who? Yep, family friend for 10 years since we were kids. Yikes. More my sister's buddy. After I posted this the other day, I researched the case more and found some other interesting facts I hadn't known before. Crazy. My friend's stepdad. He ended up strangling my friend's mother to death, then stabbing her lifeless bod, all while my friend was asleep in the next room. The guy came into my friend's bedroom, stood over her and asked her if she loved him, then proceeded to stab her 30+ times with a screwdriver in the arms, face and chest. She survived by crawling down the stairs and outside to get help. They found the stepdad a while later and I think he's serving life in prison. I also still have photos of the crime scene, somewhere. I worked with one briefly. In the late 90s I was working a job where one of the other employees had been in trouble with the law. When he got out of jail, the boss took pity on him and gave him a second chance. His first night back they put him to working with me, but he was completely useless. I had a rather unpleasant and messy 2-man job to get done, but every time I turned around he was off on the other side of the plant just talking to someone. I didn't want to be a jerk, so I told him that we needed to get done with what we were doing. After that, I didn't care what he did for the rest of the night. 15 minutes later I look up and he's gone again. Just as I was about to go looking for help, the boss shows up and asks where the other guy is. I had to admit I didn't know. Boss tracks him down and chews him out. At this the guy goes absolutely ballistic, accuses us of being xenophobic and storms out. The boss locks the door behind the jerk and lends me a hand until I could finish up by myself. 2 days later I come into work to see a bunch of people passing around the front page of the local newspaper with this guy's picture on it. Sometime within 24 hours of his rage quitting his job, he'd murdered someone. Let me tell you, that was a weird feeling. When I was an undergrad there was an older guy in one of my classes. We invited him to study with us and he was really blunt and straightforward with us about his past. He had done 22 years for killing a man while on drugs and was on parole. He wanted us to know so we could decide if we felt safe. A couple people left, but man, was he smart and enjoyable company. It taught me a lot about making snap judgments. We studied all semester and he turned out to be a decent person. He graduated that spring and told me one of the last times I SSW him that he had gotten a job at an addiction help center. My next door neighbor shot his wife while she slept. He found out that she was cheating on him. Her plan was to drain their bank account and run off with her lover, but somehow he found out. Guy strangled his girlfriend. It was an abusive relationship. He was super unstable. Just a few months before he tries to kill himself by running his truck into a pole. He wore his seatbelt. So yeah. Anyway, he strangled her, wrapped her body in plastic, and buried her up north on his parents' property. I read the court documents. He is a dumb frick. Guy worked for a buddy, did some side work for me, killed a man and set a fire to cover it up. Was hired by another contractor to do the killing because he was owed a few $1,000s. Both went to prison. Killer may have gotten death. Don't remember. Was hanging out at my bar in South Florida. I worked on my day off. 20-something kid asked me if I wanted to do a shot with him. You're paying? Sure. We do several more shots and he pays the tab and tips the bartender way too much on his credit card. He wants to go to different bar. Okay. We roll down to another bar. Same deal. Mad shots and he way over tips. Like $100 tip on $50 tab. So I ask, why you blowing your money like this? I assumed he got inheritance or hit the lotto. Nope. I shot some Mexican P in the face in Texas a few days ago. The FBI and Texas Rangers are looking for me. They're gonna find me because I am using his credit card. Oh, I have to go pee. Left the bar and went to the other side of town. A guy who was briefly at our school went and stabbed 3 people a year after he left and killed 2 of them. I was shocked, but not very surprised. He was not a nice person at all. Lots. I'm a nurse at a hospital for inmates, so we have all sorts of criminals. One of my patients last week hacked up a Kirby vacuum cleaner salesperson. My brother used to sell those. Didn't think it would be that dangerous. A kid I went to grade school with. He was pretty messed up even in 3rd grade. I remember the teacher talking to us when he was absent one day, telling us not to be alone with him, to report scary behavior. He talked about animal torture and he kept a pencil in his desk covered in boogers. He stored them there. He killed someone in his teens. In high school, one boy I knew killed another boy I knew over possible testimony over a burglary charge. There was a murder in my hometown. A guy had petrol thrown over him and he was set alight. 2 boys I went to school with were arrested some years later for it, but let off due to lack of evidence. One of them bullied me in school, so my biased opinion is that he's more than capable. They never did charge or convict anyone though. I work with psych patients. I've met quite a few with a mental illness who killed or hurt others. They've gone through trial and found not guilty for reasons of mental illness at the time of the crime. For these people, they might actually end up in a psychiatric facility. The amount of time spent there and then under supervision in the community can be longer than a normal jail term in some cases. The weird thing for me is that I'm just struck by how absolutely normal and average these people look and behave. You don't ever truly let your guard down as a worker, but if you didn't know their backstory, there's no way of knowing what tragic things they might have done. My biological father killed his best friend on a bad drug trip. There was a gun involved, but my dad killed his friend with his bare hands and passed out. I have a source, but I'm on mobile, so I'll link it later. He passed away about 5 years ago and I never really knew him as I've been in foster since I was 17. Pretty fun looking up your parents hoping to find an obituary or something, but you read that. I feel for you here as someone that's tried to research their father. I can't imagine how hard that must have been. There was a guy I knew in high school. I competed with him. We shared hotel rooms. When he invited me to his bare knuckle boxing club in the woods behind the school, seriously, I knew he was probably going to end up in jail one day. He's currently awaiting trial over the death of a priest. Some people, you just know. We had a guy come to my church who had just gotten out after 40 some years in prison for murder. He was a great guy who really loved Jesus and knew the Bible. He had gotten saved while in prison and witnessed to my inmates. After only about 8 months of being out he died. Sad, but glad to have known him the little I did. Denis Lortie. This was the man who stormed the Quebec National Assembly on a mission to kill political figures. He was a former soldier who served for many years in the Special Forces. He was thought to have been exposed to questionable and unethical practices in the military in the late 70s and early 80s. He was talked out of his killing spree by a member of government who also served in the military, who sat him down and just talked to him until he decided to surrender. I used to work with this guy for nearly 3 years when I was 16-19 before going to college. Everyone on the construction site was absolutely terrified by this guy. However, I was not. My family was scared for me at times, but my mom was not. This man thought of me as his own son. He treated with kindness, respect, asked to make sure I had enough food, chatted with me, and if I ever needed the forklift he would drop everything to drive it over and do what I needed him to do. I was stabbed on that site, but it was from someone else who mistook me for my mom's ex because I was wearing his coat at the time. I was working at a bakery and one of the security guards for that shopping center always used to come in and say hi to me and ask how my day was going. Then one day I was checking the news, and on the front page is a story about how he shot and killed his pregnant girlfriend because she wanted to leave him. I went to school with this kid. He had been in my sister's class but flunked twice and ended up in my class. He tried to stab our 5th grade teacher with scissors, was always in trouble for something, was suspected of hanging local pets to death from the bridge in our small town. His brother was as bad if not worse. He had a sister who had been in my class in kindergarten, but I never saw her again after that. Looking back, I assume she was taken away by the state or willingly sent to live with relatives, and I don't even want to think about why. Anyway, these kids' dad, who was undoubtedly the reason for all their issues, came to school functions occasionally. I didn't know him well, but I had met and interacted with him. There was a suicide in our area, and this guy bragged in a bar, a few days later, that he had actually killed the guy. He said if anyone ever said anything, they'd be committing suicide, too. My uncle and a couple other people I know were there and heard him bragging about it, telling details of the suicide he wouldn't have known unless he had been there, but no one ever reported it. He died several years ago of a heart attack. I would like know whatever happened to the daughter. She was a sweet girl. Hope she's okay. Melissa, if you're reading this, hit me up. There was a junkyard at your dad's house. I was class of 2000, and you would have been, too. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.